Good afternoon. My name is Seelan Manavalan, and I lead the product management for Aruba Central and all the services that goes with Aruba Central. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's getting launched today. So this is hot off the press, and this is Aruba Central Net Conductor. And along with me is Hari, and Hari is the product manager who leads this Net Conductor, and in just a minute we'll explain what it is. Summarizing what is Net Conductor. So Aruba Central Net Conductor is a solution. And what it is doing is it's basically bringing all of Aruba's infrastructure that you've seen in our edge services platform architecture together. It stitches up and it does orchestrate all the network and security services. So essentially, you've seen Net Inside, that's a service. You've seen Client Inside, that's a service. You will see a couple of new services today that we're going to talk. It's part of Net Conductor. And Net Conductor will basically orchestrate all of this and stitch up the solution. This is fundamentally how I like to simplify introducing what Net Conductor is. So what are we trying to solve here with Net Conductor? Net Conductor is actually an extension of, it's extending our current dynamic segmentation solution, which hundreds of our customers use today, and we've kind of expanded the scope and capabilities of that. And we have a new solution called Net Conductor. So very quickly, what are the things that we're trying to solve? First is like, as you notice, this is the biggest problem that you've seen. In fact, you've seen, when we look at our customers, and we talk to hundreds of customers before we actually profile and build their solution. And a common theme that emerges, like there are just too many tools that they actually use to consume the services. They sometimes manage their WLAN separately, the LAN separately, the WAN in one or two or more, depending on whether it's an MPLS network and an SD-WAN network. And then they also have something which is different for firewall. And we realize that there are just, the entire spectrum of management is fragmented. So we wanted to see what we could simplify there. The second thing that we noticed is network sprawl, and I think this is something that Ziad actually showed to you, all kinds of devices that show into the network. A lot of our customers asking for, hey, what's there in my network? I don't know that. So can you help me with something on these kind of sprawls? So we're like looking at these kind of problems for our customers and trying to solve those. The third one that we briefly touched upon is policy, and policy is many different things for many different people. People have WLAN policies. They have QoS policies, which are different for LAN, and they have a WAN, which is different again with SD-WAN and how they look at routing policies, and then security policies. And I have been multiple conversations with customers where they say, okay, I have a security policy which is different for firewall. I push AACLs for switches, and I do some things on the controller side, and I have everything. And a lot of people, what I've talked to are like all kind of individual touch points of how they manage their policies. It doesn't come together. And this is the other thing that makes it really complex, because if you touch a policy and set a rule, a security rule in your wireless domain, how consistent is it with your wired domain? And when the packet traverses to the WAN, and what happens to that? And how do you actually make a consistent decision across all of these pieces in the network and make sure that you're solving the problem? And then the most common refrain I've heard is, okay, we stop doing all this, we just do this one place in firewall, dump everything there, and we manage it there. But then, okay, what happens if you have a security attack? Not everything is going to touch your firewall. And then, oh yeah, then we create verbs and just contain it. And that's typically what we've heard. But these are very interesting challenges that we're trying to solve. The other thing that we look with dynamic segmentation is, we've been very successful with dynamic segmentation, but one of the problems we noticed was a lot of our large enterprise customers, service providers, and even distributed enterprise customers wanted to look for consistency that could go across multiple sites. So you saw Home Depot in the keynote. We have many retail customers who have like thousands of branches. Like we have like some who have 16,000 branches. How do you scale with them? Or if you have some university campuses where like fairly large, 100, 150,000 users in multiple big, large areas in a city, how do you solve the problem for them? So that's the scale problem that we're trying to solve. And the last one that we're trying to solve is we just want to go with an architecture that most of our customers are very reluctant to is, hey, I know you have good, nice stuff coming up, but I don't want to rip and replace my stuff. I need a gradual way. Can you help me with a solution that can do a step-by-step migration? And these are the few things that we have seen as big problems that we're trying to solve with Net Conductor. So what are the benefits of Net Conductors? Aruba Central is our single pane in which we actually administer policy and network. So we have a new service in Aruba Central that's launched along with this, and it's called a Global Policy Manager. And this policy manager allows all our customers to define the intent of what they want to do in that policy manager. And we will translate it down to what should be a wireless device related specific rule, or what should be a switch related rule, or what should be an gateway related rule, an SD-WAN related rule. So we take care of the complexities. We are abstracting the policies and having them defined in very simple policy language in a policy manager. That's a new service that we're adding in Central. We talked a little bit about the insights. The other part that we're trying to do is simplification of the networks. And this is where we traditionally have seen customers dabble with segments, usually starting with VLANs, because that's how it started 20, 30 years back. We'd say, okay, you have VLANs, and eventually you're looking at solving the broadcast domain problems. And these slowly morphed into saying, okay, now I've solved my broadcast domain problem, but I need to have an ACL, and I start to apply ACLs. And then it basically becomes, it's like, a self-fulfilling prophecy of like, you start adding more and more security segments, and then you add more VLANs, and your IP subnets grow up, and then you're managing subnets. And then that brings an interesting problem. What about user mobility, or what about device mobility in the campus? Like, we have examples where in universities we've known they're asking for users, profs who actually go from one department to another, and they're usually different subnets today. So how do you actually enforce policies? What's the traditional way in firewall? You would go write an IP ACL. So what happens to the IP ACL when the user moves, and they move from one subnet to another? You rewrite it. So you keep changing it. So that's one of the problems that what we realized talking to many customers is they started to take a step back and say, I don't want to solve that problem. Let me just solve the problem for the outbound one, and I'm good with that. But that, again, is a compromise in your security. So that's the other thing that we're trying to solve with something we've been doing for 15 years. It's called Aruba User Role. And we use this, what I call as microsegmentation. It's like, we've been doing microsegmentation for 15 years. We just didn't market ourselves well. And the whole idea of this is have a flat network. You don't need to solve the security problem of a client by using the constructs of how you divide the network for broadcast domains. And you use Aruba user roles to actually enforce the policies. And what we're doing is we simplify this, because if you have 100,000 users in a university campus, but you probably have 20 groups. There are probably 20,000 students, but they're not like very different. So you can easily group them into like 20, 30, maybe 50 user roles. So when you're writing a policy, instead of writing an IP ACL, which kind of spans really big, one, and two, you can only write it in either a core switch, which has large TCAM sizes, or firewalls, which are basically dedicated for that in hardware resources. Once you start thinking of policies in rows, we're basically shrinking like 10,000 lines of ACEs into probably max 100 lines of ACE. Yes.
So I think I missed something. Is Net Conductor a new standalone product? Is it a part of Central? Is it a collection of technologies? Is it something that has to do with Clearpass? Is it a thing that you buy? I think I missed, like, is it a package? Is it a product? Is it multiples?
Yeah, you missed my first sentence. So Net Conductor is a solution.
So it's a whole bunch of things. So you don't buy Net Conductor.
Yes.
Net Conductor is sort of a brand that you're applying to several different technologies.
Correct. So if you're looking at it, what does it constitute of? So it's a solution How do you buy it? You don't buy the solution. It's built into the ESP foundation and advanced licenses.
So it does require the advanced licenses that are per device?
So depending on what's your use case, you could choose to have foundation, but a lot of the features actually fall into the advanced license.
So Net Conductor is Central specific.
Yes, Net Conductor, the pane of management and orchestration is Aruba Central, yes.
Okay.
So essentially, the
missed
network
the first sentence
management
too.
for Net Conductor is central. I think I have a slide I can explain in more details what are the components of these.
But you don't log into the central dashboard and there's not a link that says, click here for Net Conductor and here's all the Net Conductor stuff.
Correct, that's right. We don't have a
there's
separate
not.
identity
Okay.
saying, this is a solution, basically. It's stitching up multiple services together, yes.
I heard the first sentence. I heard your explanation,
Still don't
and I
understand it.
still don't get it when you say it's a solution. That's like saying it's a thing. It's, as in, I still don't know what it is.
This is a marketing
Okay.
term for a bunch of stuff.
Exactly.
Okay,
Oh, marketing
So-
term for a bunch of stuff. Okay.
Yeah,
there you go.
There you go.
So it ties in a lot of things. It ties in a lot of services. It ties in a lot of functions together. It stitches it up. So that's why it's hard to say this is something very tangible, a product that you touch and feel it's a solution. That's typically so what does it constitute of? This is a slide that you would probably might have should. So it consists of all your infrastructure components of the ESP, your CX switches, your AOS10 gateways, and your AOS10 APs. These are the components that form the infrastructure pieces of this solution. And then we have security solutions. We talked about the Global Policy Manager, which we just launched along with Net Conductor today. This is the policy manager now we're building in Central. We talked briefly about Client Insights today. So that's the other service that you see. And then we have two other services that one is in cloud and one is in on-prem. We have a NAC in cloud, which is a service that runs on Central. This is Cloud Auth. And then, of course, it needs and many other use cases where customers use an on-prem appliance like Clearpass. So that's the other NAC that we actually stitch it up in the solution.
No CX 10K switches.
So this is 10K is going to be in second half of this year.
Oh, that's the asterisk?
Yeah, that's the asterisk. It's like, because it's a brand new switch and there's this solution has been in with some of our customers for about 6+ months now. So we typically put those numbers once we're officially supporting it.
And again, since the goal is to unify all of this and be able to policy manage across the entire network, that means this is Aruba specific. This is not going to be, this isn't supported with other vendors, right?
So we do want to support third-party devices. So I'll touch upon how our strategy is going to be. In the first phase, I mean, this is a journey. We just started our journey. We want to first stitch up the solution to make sure it delivers for our ecosystem of what we understand the best, and then slowly, eventually expand it to the next steps where,
So there is a roadmap
Yes.
for customers who maybe are not ready to go to Aruba switches yet, but they have an existing infrastructure, and you can, so kind of what
Yeah.
Airwave used to be an entry point. Hey, we can help you get visibility into your network, and then I like this a lot, let's try Aruba switches, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah,
I could
it's
see that.
very, very similar to that, but it's just a little harder in the policy piece because there's a little bit of translation that you have to end up doing in the policy piece, which is a little more complex because most vendors keep changing their APIs and you have to start then keeping that. It becomes a more laborious exercise of just maintaining those changes. So it's more effort. So that's why we're trying to do the first step is like build within what we have full control of and then slowly expand to the next devices. But then the key is, like you heard Robin talk about it, we want to pull in the insights and be able to feed back into the system. And this is something that's probably, you might have seen it with dynamic segmentation. So it's not like completely randomly new. It's been there in many years with us in some form. So this is a simplified version of what we are trying to do. We create a concept of fabric. We're building a fabric which is an overlay of all network devices that allows us to do microsegmentation. because then we can go for a flatter network, fewer VLANs and VRF. If you don't really need a VRF, don't do it. That's our advocacy. And then, because the original intent of users were to actually have security for a client, an endpoint client. So what we believe is we should be actually classifying those clients to a role and enforce a policy on the role. So you have your authentication mechanism, you classify those users and devices into those user roles, and based on their trust levels, you have your different categorizations, and you enforce the policy at the edge. As soon as the traffic comes into the network, you look at the traffic, and you enforce it at the edge. Because that's the cleanest way, that's the best way to do a denial of services prevention. Because you don't let it go further. Because once you let it go further, the next step, then again, it becomes a bigger problem.
So I think everyone here is already familiar with Aruba's role-based model. That's not new to any of us. We've all known it for years. Can you just tell us what does this do? Is essentially what you're saying is we've taken this and we've centralized it in the cloud so that you have one location where you create your policies and it's global.
Yes.
That
is one part of it. The second part of it is how we enforce and where we enforce it. So in the dynamic segmentation, our policy enforcement was always on our mobility controllers. And that was a PEF in which we used to enforce it.
Right.
Out here, we can enforce it now, the role-to-role policies in the switches. And that's the demo that we're going to show. So we can do it either in the gateways or on the switches. Or across multiple sites, which we never did before. So we now scale across thousands of sites, thousands of devices, and switch and gateway, wired and wireless. You don't have to necessarily tunnel everything to a controller. You can do segmentation based on roles, even if it's just a wired, it's just going to a local application, which is right next to it in a data center.
You can do that with Clearpass, right? You can have a global implementation of Clearpass or geographic implementation of Clearpass, and all your sites in that area their policy would be enforced via Clearpass, and it would tell the controller or would download roles or whatever it needs to. So there is a way to do it now, but are you moving away from Clearpass? Because it sounds like Clearpass is also a part here.
Clearpass is a part of it, but Clearpass does the policy enforcement. It's a NAC. The policy enforcement is always done on a network device. It's either a firewall or a switch or a gateway. That's where the ACLs are actually enforced, implemented. So the policy enforcement always was in the network devices. Clearpass was only telling you what the policy should look like, what the rules would look like, and it'll push it to the devices. We had a couple of options. We had a downloadable user roles, which we still do that. In this case, we're saying local user roles, where you just send the policies in and the devices will do it. But either way, the policy enforcement happens always in the network devices, even then and now.
Yeah, but that's how it's always been done.
So so we're not moving away from anything. It's the roles of each of those entities are remaining as is. We are expanding these devices into in wired, you can do it in switching now, which we were not able to do in gateway. We can do it other gateways. Now what happens, the biggest problem for doing a role-based policy is you would know the addresses of all the endpoints that you are familiar with, that you learn in your network routing table. But you don't know what's beyond that. And that's the second part of this that we have actually brought in new is we can now do, for example, 2 sites. If I take 2 sites, usually you don't share all the /32 addresses across those 2 sites. You're only sharing some subnets. Now, when you are trying to do ACL enforcements today, you're doing on a subnets because you don't really know the /32 on the destination because it's outside of the learn state. What we now have capabilities is what we've done is we've taken the user role, we convert that into a policy ID. So we look at the ingress. If the ingress knows the destination, then we enforce the policy at the ingress. But if it doesn't know the destination, then we encap that in the data plane and send it across, and then we enforce that in the destination. And if there's a border in between where it breaks out to the internet, then we actually enforce it in the border. So it's basically the way you scale beyond a one controller cluster model to multiple of those networks is the way that You don't know the destination. You send the source role information to the destination and do it. And this we found is more practical and more efficient and actually scalable, to be very honest, because this is the conversation I always have with customers. If you have a firewall and you are actually doing, you have 100,000 users and you're doing like 1 million auths, and you're constantly writing API calls from a Clearpass server, which can actually give you the user roles to the firewall, even if you're trying to do that, but it's all control plane. It doesn't scale well. And we're doing it across multiple sites, it's even worse. So what we've done here is we have actually got assistance from DataPath to actually do policy enforcement. And that's a big change that we've added to this architecture.
Sorry, so you said you're now defining roles in Net Orchestrator in Central.
Yes.
Something we used to do in Clearpass. So if I buy this, I no longer need Clearpass, is what you're saying.
You will still need the Clearpass as a NAC. You still need to actually use identity binding. You still need a Clearpass.
So, but so then I'm not using all of Clearpass, but I still have this other corner piece of Clearpass, the NAC piece that is required.
Yes.
But you've taken all the policy pieces out of Clearpass and put them into this other thing
Correct.
in the cloud.
Yeah, that is the right way to look at it.
So
Yes.
cool. So you're signaling that we're moving away from Clearpass, right? We're de-emphasizing these products that are out in the periphery.
No, I wouldn't say that, because let's give an example that Ziad showed earlier on. We can define the roles, the user roles, and what the rules that you want to put for security on this new policy manager services. But then when you send, so the Clearpass actually gets these, it pulls in this information from this policy manager, and it has the roles. Now there's something that you still have to tie up if it's Seelan, a user Seelan authenticating to log into the network. It's only Clearpass that knows that. And if user Seelan, and let's say there's an Active Directory behind it, and where you're trying to pull the group from which who is Seelan, you still need Clearpass to do the identity management for that. And then all you're doing is, okay, if I have a group that says, so think of it that you could have 10 different AD groups, but you might actually put them in one user role. So that mapping is still done in Clearpass today, and it's going to be done in Clearpass. That doesn't go away. So there is, I won't say everything in policy moves to central. There is a part of that policy piece that still always resides because it ties into identity very closely.
I assume you have a cheat sheet that says, in this deployment where you've got Clearpass plus Net Orchestrator, do this over here, don't do it over here. Right?
Oh, yes. Eventually, yes. And the solution briefing that we would have that, yes. So this is how we enforce our Zero Trust security framework. And this is essentially on the sides, and this is your infrastructure. Your fabric edge devices are essentially a collection of switches and gateways that form the network. And we define the policies, the roles and policies in the policy manager. And we push that into these devices, all of these devices. Now, this can be in one site, it can be in 100 sites, it can be in 1,000 sites. It can be in gateway, it can be a switch. Today, we're doing only for gateway and switch. We'll do it in AP later. It's like a phased journey. So this is the first step. You push the policies. What we realized is if you don't tie it to IPs, most customers don't change their policies often. The policies are fairly static. They don't like change because the intent is almost not very dynamic. It is the IP addresses that's dynamic, and that's key. And that's the place where that needs to have a dynamic behavior. So what we're doing is, and I think you saw in the previous presentation where you have telemetry that's streamed out of all of these devices natively, where client insights will profile these devices and send information about what it is into Clearpass or CloudAuth. You give a choice of what's your authentication service. You could choose to have Clearpass or you could choose to have CloudAuth. And then CloudAuth is basically the one which is actually doing the radius or AAA. And it's like, it's authenticating the devices, looking for the privileges and tagging them into a role and sending that role into those devices, saying, hey, this user and this device belongs to this user role. And then we basically look at the traffic, and the policy is already there. So if you have a user A to role B, and we basically enforce policies in the network, in the fabric.
So
yes.
You have CloudAuth or Clearpass.
Yes.
What is CloudAuth is just authentication? Is it a replacement for Clearpass? What is?
So this is so a lot of customers who, so Clearpass is our policy engine today. It's the NAC, and it's deployed in multiple hundreds of customers. It's on-prem.
Yeah.
And this is for deployment scenarios where you look at a lot of customers who have their own data centers. They have their Clearpass, they have their AD services running local and things like that. So your LDAP or whatever you want to choose, right? So that's all running local. This is the existing brownfield deployment. Auth is a new service. A lot of our customers who are looking at, especially in mid-markets, who are looking at, hey, I want to use cloud-based identity service. Like I want to use Azure AD. So, and that's more efficient. We look at, centralizing all of these, and for those kind of use cases where everything is in cloud, we can actually have the NAC services in the cloud.
Is it a true AAA?
Yes, it does .1x and Mac Auth, yes. Radius and Mac Auth, yes.
Okay.
We do
Radius and NAC?
It's still in the early phases. We are
Okay.
in the journey for Cloud Auth, but this is like, it does.
I'm just trying to figure out what's the differentiator here? Because Clearpass you can run in the cloud now. You can do Azure in the cloud. You can,
Yeah, I mean, so Clearpass does a lot of third-party integrations for very, very niche and custom things.
Right.
That's still always going to be remaining in Clearpass. We're not going to build that in Cloud Auth. Cloud Auth is more a cookie cutter simplified version of this, which will scale on the cloud for that. So that's how we look at it. Because we don't want to build all of these.
If you just want AAA authentication in the cloud, Cloud Auth it puts AAA in the cloud, but
Yes.
we're not doing policy management, but it integrates with Net Conductor so
Well,
that
yeah.
you can do policy
Yes.
that way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
So you're splitting kind of the pieces in Clearpass, the Auth in Cloud Auth, and the NAC in Net Conductor.
The
Rolled up.
NAC,
Oh, the policy, I'm sorry,
The
policy
management,
management.
yeah, the policy management is the
Yeah,
only
yeah,
one
yeah.
which we are,
Yeah, sorry.
because it's important to do any simplification, you need to abstract it.
Yeah.
And you need to abstract it in some place which is common. Common across sites, common across devices, and common across different translations. And that is the benefit of doing it in cloud. And that's why we're moving that into the cloud. And that's architecturally efficient in that sense.
Quick question on the policy manager component. Does that include device management? So because Clearpass does have like a TACAX piece also. Since it's all by default, all Aruba hardware, are there options to say just by policy, if I logged in and I was a network administrator that I have full access, but if someone else logged in, they could have read write? Is it the
That's a great question. That's why I was hesitating to say everything of policy moves to policy manager. Some of the TACAX function will still remain in Clearpass.
okay?
Yeah, so that's like a kind of a split brain. It's like you don't have to push all of those because they are generally services which are point located. You have a TACAX server that's local to a region, typically when you're looking at it, and it load balances across a bunch of TACAX servers behind it. And so there are some of these things that's how industry has evolved and customers have used it. So we're not going to touch that. What we're touching is where you define security rules and what are those rules. That's the piece that we are moving to the policy manager.
Okay.
And of course, it will have QoS rules and routing rules later. I mean, this is the...
I think you guys should consider it at some point because, I know I'm getting more and more requests for nothing on-prem, right? Cloud, everything, right?
So we have everything in Central. It's just that so today, if you look at an IAP model today, we do have it in Central, but it's just in a different tab in Central.
Right.
Now, granted, that is one of the simplifications we're doing and improvising. I think you were asking in the previous meeting, was okay, it's too many touches where you ought to reach to. So one of the intent of this policy manager is we are simplifying the user experience by keeping all of the information for policy in one place so that they don't have to go into a device policy level tabs to kind of go configure a firewall rule in a gateway or do an ACL in a switch separately. So we just do it in one place and it'll take care of the distribution. And that's one of the things that we're doing as a kind of a user enhancement, user experience enhancement. So this is essentially how we do the Zero Trust framework for, yes.
I have a lot of customers that are having challenges with integrating with Azure AD for things like machine authentication because of how that's all been decoupled. Are there any specific attributes of this that assist with that type of integration?
So that's an interesting question you asked. So we showed you a demo what Ziad was showing. So today, the Cloud Auth, Mac Auth, actually pulls the tag that you saw in the previous meeting, where we could actually classify the clients and send that as a tag. And there was a system tag that he showed. we actually can use that to, use as a grouping mechanism to write a user role. We always did the left-hand side one. That's what we used to call dynamic segmentation. We used to have APs, we had tunnels, we tunnel them into a controller, and we enforce the policies in the controller, and we also had the forwarding decision taken in the controller. That is how we did. But we realized that when you look for bigger scales, campuses with 100 to 200,000 users and devices, it doesn't scale. So then we actually, so this is the enhancement that we're bringing, is where now we have a choice that we give to the customer. They can do, if you are a small branch, small office, you can just keep it in a centralized overlay. But if you're a very large campus, you're running at like 6,000 switches and 20,000 APs, and you have multiple controller cluster pairs. And then we recommend you a distributed overlay. So we have a choice. We give the choice to the customer. If they're looking for simplicity, they can actually choose to go the centralized way. It's very simple. But if they're looking for performance and scale and more pervasiveness, we have a distributed overlay, and you can choose any side which one you want to do. You can small sites you can do centralized, big sites you can do distributed. We give you an option of choice. You could choose either of these or mix. One of the things that we're doing in the distributed fabric is we are going on standards based. So this distributed fabric is built on multi-protocol BGP EVPN, and the data plane tunnels is VXLAN. And this is how we are standardizing. And when we are talking about multi-vendor interoperability, our goal is to kind of get to some standard that most vendors use. And that's essentially, it's like a multi-vendor interoperability is always a two-way handshake. I mean, we can reach out and open up our hands to say, hey, let's shake hands, but the other person also has to do that. And that's always been the challenge in the industry. But we're trying to stick to standards. It's BGP, it's EVPN, it's in RFC, and VXLAN is in RFC. And this is the standards in which we are building all of these fabrics. And we're relying on that we are going the standards way so that we are interoperable with other vendors. And we talked about, I'm going to probably skip back and forth a little bit more. Let me just come back to first explain what we are releasing now. In phase one, what we just announced today, this has been in with few of our customers already in their beta setups. What we are doing is a large campus deployment scenario where a net conductor it's not just a policy piece, it's also the network fabric construction piece. So we automate overlays. So we also do a lot of automation. All of these is a typical campus where you have wireless clients connected to a bunch of controllers which offer fast roaming. And they typically drop off to a switch network, and then it goes to the WAN, to the northbound traffic or anywhere else. So what we've done is in this architecture, you still have the same tunnels that you existed for the APs, no change there. What we brought in new is now we have connections from the gateways to the switches that we do a VXLAN tunnel in which we pass the context of the policy, and that's what is called the policy ID, which I'll explain in a packet structure in a while. And this is how we share information in real time between a wireless and a wired network. And then in the wired network, we have an EVPN fabric that actually can scale very large sites. And we can do a full mesh configuration. And the beauty of this architecture, as I told earlier, is we want to simplify the change management. So if you want to do simplification of change management, you want to have fewer VLANs, you want to have flatter network with very few subnets, and that subnet should just float. And the ability for users to kind of connect anywhere in the network. You have a laptop, you're working on a docking station, which is not a very fashionable thing these days. I'm just giving an example, cooking it up. And you kind of log in and you're on a wired client. You log in and you get authenticated, you're a wired profile. You're usually in a different subnet. And then you have a meeting, you yank your laptop off, walk into a room, and then you're connected on a wireless. Now guess what happens today is basically there are two different subnets and you have two different policies. Out here in this architecture, it doesn't really matter because the policy is on the user role and the user role goes along with the user, and you are into the wireless network, you get the same policy on the other side of the network. So that's one of the benefits. The other benefit here is when you go across application, we have visibility into data centers. So you don't necessarily have to have multiple fabrics for data center separate and campus separate. A lot of the data centers that we're seeing in customers are anywhere between 5 and 10 racks is what we see a lot of these days, because most of them are like going a hybrid model where they're offloading a lot of this compute resources into the cloud, and the data centers are becoming leaner and more edge-centric. And for us, we look at this opportunity saying, you don't really need to build multiple fabrics. You can just do one fabric and just connect them. And this allows us to do all of these together in one seamless way across the applications local. I'll come to the applications for the cloud when you go out of the internet. So that's the other architecture that we're doing. So this is existing today. We launched this. This is already in pilots in many customer sites, and we're going to go general availability in 2.5.6 this June. The other part of this architecture is this is a place where we had a few banks and a few hospitals chains in US who actually asked us, hey, I have a doctor in Sacramento who wants to just make sure that they're not able to talk to the infusion pump in San Jose or Santa Clara. I come from California, so my knowledge of cities are more tuned to that. But so how do you enforce that? Today, even if you have Clearpass can actually say, hey, you are this role, but it doesn't have a visibility into this infusion pump is trying to talk to a doctor's laptop or vice versa. What we do here is we have our SD branch fabric. We can actually interconnect all of these sites, and in our SD branch fabric, we can actually pass the user role information. And this is, again, if we know the destination role in ingress, we'll enforce it in ingress. If we don't know the destination role, then we hit the gateway. In the gateway, we know, is it to my known destination address? SD branch, if you're orchestrating the WAN infrastructure, we know that. We automatically tag that and pass it along the WAN infrastructure into the destination. So the doctor's identification is already there in the data plane. When it comes into the other destination, it looks at the doctor's talking to an infusion pump. This is a policy violation, and you deny. So we are able to now do this with this architecture.
So it's basically a layer 2 connection all the way across all your sites.
This is not a layer 2 connection. Okay. So think of VXLAN as more like a NCAP method than actually a L2 extension method here. It's more like a purpose, because it's a standard base where there is a definition, we're using that as an NCAP. Okay. And the whole purpose of that is to carry the user role.
And the tunnels are all auto-configured as you add your devices to Central.
Yes.
You don't have to set up the VXLAN.
So that is the
it
beauty.
creates,
Correct.
it's like an outbound connection.
Right.
And then
We want to actually show you how easy we've made it to, like, few clicks of a button and we'll automate all of these fabric connections. So this is the other thing that we've done. The good thing about this is also, it works with third-party SD-WAN also. So we have some customers who use some other vendors' SD-WAN, and we basically treat that as an underlay, and we can actually work across that also. The fundamental decision in the gateway is, okay, is it going to my own network or is it going out to internet? And if it's going out to internet, then we enforce then we are the last hop on that packet, and we enforce the rule at the gateway and then send it out to internet. But if it's going to the other side of the network, then we say, okay, we know it's our destination, so we send it and let the destination enforce it if we don't know the source. Sometimes we also know the source destination in the source gateway as well. But these are like, statistical probabilities. The other thing that we're doing is in phase 2, we will be actually integrating our Edge Connect gateways also. This is sometime towards the end of this year, where the EC Edge Connect gateways will form part of our fabric. In our fabric, we have terms like edge and border. Border is essentially where you go from interior gateway protocols to an exterior gateway protocol. So when you're looking at that, so Edge Connect fabric will be a part of this fabric, and so we can actually stitch it up together multiple sites. So all of this policy orchestration is coming from Central, and it's getting distributed across all of these different devices. So this is the other thing that we are looking at, and in terms of these. So you really don't need VRFs if you really must. The thing what we realized is most customers are used to doing VRFs for segmentation, drop in the firewall. Well, so that's why we have to keep that. But generally speaking, it's all user roles. Because security is all about client and applications. You don't really need any networking dependency here. So That's the goal of this. This is a plan, and let me quickly show you what this standard thing was. This is not a standard, I'll be very honest. This is an Ietf Draft, which is, and this is not proposed by us. This was proposed by Cisco in the Ietf world. And the Ietf Draft number is put in the bottom. And this is, we believe, is the same encapsulation method that's used in their campus and data center, which are two different architectures. They use the same. And what we heard in the Juniper's architecture is also this exactly the same data plane structure. And this is what our step off is. If we really want to be multi-vendor interoperable, we want to go that extra step and say, okay, this is the method that we use so that other vendors eventually can interoperate. We use standard BGP protocols, so absolutely interoperable any other BGP device. So this is essentially where we encap our user roles into a 16-bit group policy ID. This ID carries the user role, which is essentially the policy identifier for the client, the source. And we traverse that across to the destination if we don't have it. And that allows us to enforce not only across our campus. Suppose if you're having this on a virtual gateway on AWS where you're dropping onto a workload, we should be able to do that as well. So this is the list of devices that are supported.
Quick question.
Yes, sorry.
The policy ID. So if I want to implement policies that are third-party policies that aren't Aruba's policies, so I'm integrating a third-party product, they would have to set up their own IDs, and that's how I map it across to apply those
Yes,
policies. That's through
yeah,
the ID.
correct. That is right. Because the ID is just an integer. It's just a representational number for what the policy, who is the user. Right. It's as simple as that, right? Or what is the application? It could be, you're trying to just understand, is this a SAP workload or what's the other one we use? Workday. If let's say you're using Workday, okay, Workdays are like, there will be multiple workloads of Workdays and you're just classifying them as Workdays. It's like you can group them. So this is just a grouping ID. It's just a grouping ID.
Right.
So you could choose to do, whatever you want to look at. But
And this draft standard, how much support are you getting from other industry members and participation in creating this draft?
This is interesting. This is not our draft, as I said earlier. It's a Cisco's draft.
It is a Cisco
and we're
draft,
just trying to be interoperable, so we're leveraging what they put out in these standards.
Okay.
And I think they probably let it lapse.
They're at 5 right now.
They're at 5, yeah. I mean, this one hasn't changed. They used up some of the result bits, but you're right. Yeah.
Okay.
Might be.
Got it.
Okay, so I think I want to kind of close with this one. This is essentially, we have, these are the devices that we support, and these are the platforms that we're releasing with 256. That's our next Aruba Central release. And the solution is going to be, and when you see allow listed, that basically means that we have had this feature in Central for a few months now, and we give it only to the customers that use it. So they try it out on that. So this has already been in some kind of pilots in the customer networks, but in their more like a POC networks, if you will. But this is where it is, and this is availability.
So will you be taking this to the Salona?
At this point of time, we haven't thought about it, to be honest. But it's definitely something, because we're looking at AirPass and other constructs of how we guest onboarding, and then definitely there is a potential scope for integrating with that as well, yes. But as of now, we have enough of backlog of things to do in the next 1 year to kind of build the rest of the stuff, because the next step is like we want to kind of do a little bit more on the data center piece as well. So I don't want to talk too much about the roadmap part, but I think we just, as you saw in the announcement today, we have AT&T tie-up for AirPass, and so there definitely is going to be more scopes for such of these. Once we get them, the beauty of this is everything is on Central.
And what's the availability on Central?
This one?
Yeah.
This is 256.
256?
256 is most likely going to be in July. Yes.
In terms of some of the large enterprise features, the policy creation portion of that, are there role-based access controls to that to subdivide who can create policies, to have like a large organization that has regionalized IT or something along those lines?
So actually, we are getting asked on that with multiple of our customers.
Yeah.
So today in Central, our RBACs are a little tight and limited in that sense. In the next release, we are actually building more fine-grained RBACs for sites and little bit like distribution in groups. Today we do it only in the groups. We're trying to go into device levels and build that. And we're also doing a little bit of enhancements in Central, which is a different topic. And we are going with more fine-grained RBAC levels for these, so that allows them to. I've seen some customer use cases where the central rules, security rules, are defined by the central IT team, and then different divisions take off, and then they start defining the local security rules. So that's a big part of it. Yes.
So it's sort of like the hierarchical model that we saw like in
Yes,
OS8.
correct,
Okay.
right. So yeah, very much in the plans.
Okay.
This is basically what I'm going to show. I'm going to show a lot of the capabilities that we announced today. And in fact, some of the things that Seelan kind of showed us forward, a little bit more of the forward-looking stuff, where we have two fabrics across two geographical locations tied together by an SD-WAN, Silver Peak Edge Connect SD-WAN. And what I'm going to show is how Central can orchestrate policy centrally for both global role-based policies, as well as the new workflow that we added in Aruba Central to automate and simplify VXLAN EVPN deployments. And I'm going to do a quick client demo also. I have a laptop in one of the sites, and I have a camera in another site. And I'm going to show how role-based policy enforcement happens across both of these devices.
And just before we start, SD-WAN is not required for this, right? This works without SD-WAN.
This works within sites. This works across wired and wireless within a single site. But thought I'd show something more holistic here. All right, let's get to it. So I'm going to start with Aruba Central. And as you can see, this is the first, what does it show up? Okay, not great. I'm going to go full screen. So I'm going to start with the policy manager, as Seelan was describing. The Net Conductor policy manager is a new workflow we announced today. It's going to be one of the core components of the Central Net Conductor solution. As you can see at the global level, under the security tab, we have introduced a new feature or a new capability called the client roles. And this is really where all the questions about where the centralized policy will eventually move to. This is where it will happen. So right now what you can see is you have the ability to define your roles, create your roles, add a description, associate a policy identifier to it, and define policies in terms of role-based policies. So let's take an example of security administrator. You have the ability to add a description. You see that the policy identifier is created for a particular role that identifies that role across the entire network. And the way you define policy is really simple. As you can see, I've already created this role, security administrator, which has bi-directional policies. So it can communicate with IoT cameras, and IoT cameras can communicate to devices of role security administrator, and also to itself. I have another role, let's take contractor, which is the other role I'm going to show in the demo, which I do not have any permissions other than to itself. And I'm going to spend 10 seconds walking through how a policy definition, a role creation would look like. So I am creating a new role called tech field A, just to show. And you can see that the policy identifier has been auto-generated. As we think about multi-vendor and capabilities in the future, right now, it doesn't matter. If it's an all Aruba network, you can use the number that's auto-generated. But if you want to make modifications, you can do that as well. And so this is, and of course, the way you define policy, like I mentioned, was by thinking about policies in a bi-directional fashion, two other roles.
That policy identifier is a numeric value only?
It's an integer value that is actually encoded in the data plane in our infrastructure devices to signify what the source role of that traffic is. All right, so next going back to the slide, we talked about different choices of overlays for customers. So as you can see, I have already created a fabric, the concept of the distributed overlay fabric on one of my sites, and I'm going to walk you through how we've now enabled workflows to automate and simplify the deployment of such a fabric. Go to the my fabric. And under my switch config, UI config options, you can see this new capability or new workflow called Fabrics, which is really designed to use, to abstract complexity of the technology stack, VXLAN, EVPN, and allow customers to use a guided workflow to deploy a fabric on their existing network. So think of what the fabric does as on an existing underlying network or an underlay that's up and running, sucking in the information of what that network looks like to generate configuration and distribute that across multiple devices in the network. So, and the approach we have taken, and I'm going to just walk you through some of the steps. What we have done and the approach we have taken is we want to keep simplicity at the forefront. And so wherever we ask users for input, it's going to be tied to things that are related to their own network. And wherever possible, we try to auto-generate numbers and values for them. For an example being the BGP AS number that you see here, we actually auto-populate an AS number as part of the workflow. But for users who want to go in and change it, they have the ability to do so as well. But other than that, the fabric name, the way we automate configurations for the fabric is by bringing in the concept of fabric personas. And I'm going to just walk you through some of the fabric personas that we use. Let me start with the route reflector, or the RR as we call it here. It's really, in the BGP EVPN fabric, it's a concept where all the other devices in the fabric points to that single device. It really cleans up the configuration so that it doesn't become any-to-any mesh in terms of configuration. But we recommend that the core device in your network is the route reflector.
So that could be a gateway, that could be a switch, that could be
Yes. This is with respect to the switch fabric where the route reflector would be on a switch.
Okay.
So think about this workflow as
Kind of like the conductor for that site.
You can think about
Yeah.
it that way. And what we do is we extend this wired fabric into the wireless world, and I'll show you how that is done in this workflow as well. The edge device is very important, are your access layer switches where clients actually join, authenticate. Your VXLAN tunnels they start at the edge persona, and this is where the distributed policies also get enforced for all of these clients. Border is a unique function for a specific device that gives external connectivity from the fabric to the rest of the network. And the stub is something unique to Aruba, where the stub is how we extend roles and role-based policies into the wireless world. And so think about the stub as acting as part of the EVPN VXLAN fabric on one side, and connecting a static VXLAN, using a static VXLAN tunnel to the wireless gateway. So that's how we bridge those two worlds in our fabric wizard. Like Seelan was describing, we have the ability to have multiple VRFs, and for customers who do truly need multi-tenancy and IP subnet reuse, we give them the ability to create multiple VRFs in their fabric, or what we call the overlay networks. But for most of our customers, we auto-generate an overlay network or an overlay VRF and populate most of the parameters for them, so that this is where things might introduce complexity for the network administrator if they do not understand detailed workings of BGP and EVPN. And the final step is how we point the stub devices to your gateway, so we take the input of the gateway IPs as well to form those static VXLAN tunnels to the wireless gateways. And that's it. So in a bunch of clicks, what happens is that you have really abstracted the complexity or something that might have taken a few hours at the minimum of pointing each and every device to each other, making sure all your BGP parameters match up, line up, and making sure VRF is consistent across the entire fabric. So something even for 200 devices can be provisioned in a matter of clicks in a few minutes.
So in the different things you selected there, some of it was auto-generated, some of it was learned because it's a managed device in the system. Is that a fair statement? So if I'm picking a gateway, it's
Exactly.
something that's already managed by Clearpass or by Central, so I know that it exists, so I can do it.
Absolutely. So you notice that I did not give any interface peering. What are my interface IPs? What are my loopbacks? None of that is input by the user. All of that is read because Central has knowledge of all these device attributes and used to generate configuration to push down onto all.
So
all
the
of
only
your
thing
devices.
you actually did was pick your reflector?
Pick my reflector, pick what was, no, actually you pick all of the, you assign personas to all of those devices. So if you say which are my edge devices, which is my border, which is my stub device.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So
and
you do have to pick those.
You have to pick those. But you don't go in and say, okay, this loopback is what I need to use. What is my loopback IP? Which interfaces am I using to peer from an edge to a border? None of that. It's all
Okay.
automated.
And you have two RRs, but you don't have to designate one as a primary or secondary. You just say these are the RRs.
Right.
And then the rest is automated.
all
Okay.
taken care of. And so the next step, that's kind of step one where you create the fabric. The next incremental step is to create your actual client VLANs. And I'm going to walk you through a client segment or an overlay segment that I've already created. Let's say you have done creating your fabric, and what you want to do is create a segment that your clients can now onboard to. And as you can see, most of the parameters that we ask here are nothing really closely tied to EVPN or VXLAN. The ones that are, we auto-populate in most scenarios. And so things like VLAN name, what your VLAN ID is, DHCP server, your default gateway, things like VINI numbers are all auto-populated. And you have the ability to go in and change them, but for most users who in a greenfield deployment do not need to do so, can use the numbers that the values that we auto-populate. The roles is where you actually tie, okay, all my contractor, security admin, and IoT cameras, as they authenticate into the network, I want to tie them to this particular segment. So this is an easy way of doing that mapping. You can, of course, choose not to do it here and rely on Clearpass or CloudAuth to do that, send both those attributes at the same time.
Like a dynamic VLAN assignment.
VLAN plus your role assignment through Clearpass. But this is, we find that this is a powerful tool for users who don't want to give that much flexibility, but rather want to have a deterministic mapping. And finally, when you build a segment, you may choose to put it on your entire network, have a stretch of VLAN across the whole fabric. You may want to segment wired and wireless separately. You want to may do it only on a segment of your wired network. We give you the ability to pick and choose the devices where you want to apply a particular VLAN. And that's it. Yeah, again, a few clicks. A lot of things are abstracted. Complexity is minimum, and you're good to go.
So from a workflow standpoint, because it's always hard to tell when you jump into something that was created, the VLANs that are there, do those have to exist on the switch already in advance, or?
This is a workflow that creates a VLAN for you and assigns it to a particular overlay network. So if you had multiple VRFs in the first workflow, if you created multiple VRFs, let me go back really quick. You have the ability to choose between the VRFs that were there, but if you just had that one, it will be tied to that particular VLAN. But you are creating a new segment along with this workflow.
So if I had a switch that was in the fabric,
Yes.
that a certain role had never connected to before, they connect to it, the fabric will provision that switch port for a VLAN that wasn't on that switch and get me connected.
Through authentication, yes.
Through authentication, sure.
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you're right now you're creating a VLAN on a switch, and does that? I think also to his point is so you can dynamically create a role with a VLAN that doesn't currently exists on that switch, and it'll just spin it up and just say, okay, we need to create this tag, this VLAN on the
Yes.
trunk port, and then put this user on that role.
Absolutely. So what it does, it creates that default gateway across all of your, all the devices
Okay.
that you
So
select.
any VLAN you create will be accessible.
Will be accessible. And
Gotcha.
as clients authenticate, that's when you actually spin up the tunnel with the associated VNI mapping and peering to all the other devices which has that same VLAN. So
Speaking, because you said the magic word tunnel, will this also support bringing up tunnels, user-based tunnels?
So
Role-based
those are
tunnels?
those are the two overlay models that we
Okay.
separate. We're keeping it separate. They can coexist, but this particular workflow is specific for the distributed overlay fabric, where the tunnels are more EVP and VXLAN
Okay.
in nature, not the UBT tunnels.
Okay.
So let me get to the actual demo. So I have a client running. This is, like I said, this is I'm showing a laptop that is accessing a camera from across the WAN.
Okay.
And I've already created all the roles and policies. So, and it is a Silver Peak Edge Connect WAN. So what I can actually show you, and this is something that is a little forward-looking but powerful. And so, starting with the topology, this is the laptop is in SJC and my camera is in NYC. And if I go to the flows table, what we have added new as part of this capability, now you can actually see the source and destination roles in your flow tables for that traffic. So that HTTP traffic that I'm initiating, you can see that I have a source role security administrator and a destination role IoT. And going a little bit more
So this
in
is not
detail.
Central anymore, though. This is Silver Peak,
This
right?
is Silver Peak
Okay,
Orchestrator.
okay.
I'm just kind of setting the context.
Okay.
And you can, and eventually, as part of the roadmap, again, as Seelan mentioned, this is a little further into the roadmap, but the goal is to bring all these capabilities and visibility into Central as well. But here you can see that we go to the next level and can actually see the VNI and the GPID that we configured on Central being reflected on Orchestrator as well. So what I'm going to do as the last step is really show policy enforcement in action. And so I'm going to go in and change my role of the laptop from security administrator on Clearpass. So again, tying Clearpass. So your NAC capabilities still very much tied to Clearpass or you can move to the cloud with Auth. So I'm going to hit save. I changed it to a contractor. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Central to actually trigger a port bounce. And what that should do is, as my client now authenticates with the contractor, it should now deny access from my laptop to the camera. But basically, you can see that access has been denied, and that's kind of where the role-based policies has been enforced across the WAN. The last thing that I do want to talk about is the last piece of the global policy orchestration slide that Seelan showed. We now have the ability to natively stream telemetry for clients into Central. What we used to have as global policy, a client Clearpass device insight is now inherently capability on Central. And so going back to the camera that I was showing, you can see that now that client we have the ability to profile it natively on Central from information sent from the switching device. And so attributes such as the MAC OUI, DHCP attributes, options, user agents, and some flow level data is now being transmitted to Central, where that is being used to generate this facilities and building automation tag. And what this tag, what you can do with this tag is if I go back to Clearpass, I now have the ability to use that tag. As you can see, that facilities and building automation tag shows up in Clearpass for that particular client. Now I can use this tag to create roles or assign roles based on that information and bring in devices that do not support authentication methods such as .1x and MAC Auth into this whole global policy ecosystem.
Is there for all the devices and the group type settings, you guys mentioned that usually, a phone that's in one place is very similar to a phone that's in another place. Same holds true across customers, right? It's like, generally, I don't want a contractor to talk to something at all my customers, right? So, is there a way to, like for us who are setting these up for, a bunch of different customers, create something and then just import that to the customers and start learning and mapping to it so we can say these are the classifications we want to use consistently across customers who see that it works and we've proven it out, and then to sort of accelerate the configuration process.
Policy automation is kind of what
Yeah.
you're getting towards,
fair.
and that's something that's our North Star and our end goal. So we're building all these capabilities right now to start us on that journey, but you're at best practice policy, leveraging all the data we have using machine learning and AI, and giving customers the easy button. Hey, this is what your policy should look like for IoT cameras, is eventually what we want to get to at some point.
Because I could also see like an MSP use case where it sits up in like a templates category or something, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.